On today's episode of Teammate Talks, I'm really excited to talk about this because focus, ADHD, is one of my big issues. So focus can be a really big issue for me, and it's one of the things that we try our best to help others with. So we're going to talk about getting stuck in a rut or a pattern of behavior. This is something that we all fall into from time to time, getting stuck in the same old patterns or the same old decision making or the same ways that we do things. Now, as I go through this discussion, be really excited to have you guys comment. Hi, Mrs. Rose, and join the discussion because that's what makes it interesting, right? When I get the perspective of what you guys are thinking. So the main thing I want to talk about when getting stuck in a rut, one of the main factors to getting stuck in a rut or a certain way of thinking, or having difficulties seeing opportunities in front of you and things like that, comes down to a very small piece of the brain. Now, this piece of the brain has a lot of different functions. There's actually quite a few things that it does, but there's one main function that we're going to focus on today. So this part of the brain is called the reticular activation system. Okay, the reticular activation system. And essentially what this does, to water it down to its most basic form, is its selective focus, selective attention. It's the part of the brain that filters through all the information that our senses take in and filters out and only sends to the conscious brain the things that it thinks are important. So this is something that's kind of a sort of unconscious thing that happens, right? It's just a part of the brain that filters. So the thing is our brain can only handle what's considered to be about 100 pieces of information every few seconds. Well, there's a lot more pieces of information hitting our senses than that at any given time. So this is an important part of the brain to filter out and try to see what is important, the reticular activation system. It's what kind of chooses what's important. But how does it choose? So how does it choose what's important to pay attention to? Well, it chooses based on what's valuable and what's threatening. So the things that are the most valuable are going to rise to the surface of what you think about, and the things that are the most threatening are going to rise to the surface of what you think about. Now, how does it know what is valuable and threatening? It's just a tiny little piece of the brain. How would it know? Well, it knows through what you teach it. It knows through past experiences, past traumas, and past rewards. That's how it knows what you are probably going to want to pay more attention to. So, for example, the reticular activation system, or RAS, it is very strong when you hear your name. So, for example, when you hear your name, that is something the reticular activation system sometimes sees as value, or if you've been through some traumas, may see it as a threat, but it is something that will draw your attention to it, or hearing something that even sounds like your name. So, if you've ever thought you heard your name in a crowd, turned around to look, things like that, that is your reticular activation system saying, hey, there's this signal from somewhere over here that might be important to you. Now, how does that get us stuck in a rut? Well, the thing is it gets us, our reticular activation system is based on our choice or our experience of what has been valuable or threatening. So it can get us stuck into the same patterns of behavior because we can get to a point that we can't see the opportunities in front of us. So let's take a very simple example of that. I'm pretty sure all of us has lost something right in front of our face before, or lost our glasses on our head or on our eyes, or lost our keys when they were in our hand. Well, this is the RAS system. So there's lots of reasons that might be the case, but one particular reason is maybe you've had a terrible experience with when you lost your keys once before. Maybe when you were a kid, you got in trouble a lot, or serious trouble, for losing things or for not being able to find things as a kid or a teenager or whatever. And so now you come across something, and when you first look for it, if you don't see it instantly, which is not unusual because your RAS is still deciding on what's important, right? So you might be looking for something, your brain might be thinking of something else, and you don't see it firsthand. Then you think, oh man, I know I put my keys there. They should be there, but they're gone. I've already looked. I can't find them. And then you convince yourself, you start saying, well, my keys are missing. My keys are missing. My keys are gone. My glasses are gone. Whatever it is, you start telling yourself that. It's telling your RAS, oh, my glasses are gone. Oh, my keys are gone. So that RAS is not looking for signals to find your keys. It's looking for signals to not find them, right? So what ends up happening is if you convince yourself that, well, they're lost, I don't know where they are, I can't find them, you won't be able to see them. You won't be able to even feel them in your hand. But someone else can walk up and go, oh, look, they're right there. Or, hey, is that them in your hand? Because they haven't already decided that those things are missing, right? So this is one of the things that the reticular activation system can do, is it can make you it can help you by filtering information to pay attention to what's important, but it can also hurt you if you convince it that something is wrong or that something is not there, then it will show you that it's not there. So this is also what feeds our bias behavior. The RAS system is what feeds bias and ego as well. So if you decide, for example, that you're going to believe a certain thing about somebody or a certain thing about humanity or whatever it is, so you decide you're going to believe something, well, then your RAS is going to filter out any information that is contradictory to that, because it knows that that's not what your brain believes in. So it's going to look for things that back up what your brain believes in, and it's going to try to remove, before you even become conscious of it, the things that would threaten your belief, the things that would threaten your ego. And so your RAS can make it very, very difficult to even take criticism well, right? Because if you're suddenly faced with something that, or somebody that says that maybe you were wrong about something, but you truly believe you were right about something, but now you're faced with somebody that says you're wrong, some information that says you're wrong or something like that, your RAS will try to kick it out as a threat, right? Sure, you'll pay attention to it, but you'll see it as a threat, and then you'll continue to look for information that shows that you are right. It can be very difficult to overcome this, even when you notice it, even when you know it's there, aware of it. Yes, so as Mrs. Rose said, the negative becomes the focus. Can't, won't, don't. So talking about focus, focus is going to be our word of the week next week. And focus is one of my favorite things to study. Focus can be very, very difficult. So, and mostly because of things like this, like the RAS system, reticular activation system, because like I said, it's only going to see things as threats and rewards, and it's going to base what is a threat and what is a reward based on past experience. So people that have been through a lot of traumas, for example, I mean, everybody's been through some trauma, but people who have been through a lot of traumas, for example, might see everything in front of them as a threat. They might see any particular, they might see, here's one for me, I'll use me as an example. When people are overly nice to me, I see it as a threat, and I start looking for the negative, like what's wrong with this, what's under this, what's the point of this, right? What's happening with it? And I see it that way because in my early life, there were many times that adults in particular, or people, were overly friendly with me because they wanted something from me, or they wanted something not good from me, or something along those lines. So nowadays, when someone's really friendly with me, it's easy for my RAS to take over and start looking for what is the ulterior motive, what's the way they're going to hurt me, what's the way they're trying to, and I start looking at that kindness as if it's threatening, right? This is something that I struggle with, and I try not to, right? Because I'm familiar with the RAS, I'm familiar with selective attention. And so the good news about it, the good news about RAS is that it's a part of the brain, and like any part of the body, it can be retrained. It's just difficult to retrain it because it kind of performs an unconscious function, right? But for example, let's go back to the key example. So if you get to the point you look for your keys, like I've looked everywhere, they're gone, they're lost. The thing you have to do is you have to stop and close your eyes, and you have to repeat over and over, my keys are there. I know they're there. I put them there. My keys are there. I know they're there. I believe they're there. Once you believe it, then your RAS, the reticular activation system, is going to wake up and actually start to look for signs it's there instead of for signs that it's not there. So it's going to begin to look for the reward instead of the threat. The thing about the RAS is it does tend to, not in kids. In kids, it's a little like, it could go either way, right? But in adults, especially adults that have been through trauma, the RAS tends to see threats over value, meaning that a person who's been through a lot of trauma is more likely to see all the risk and none of the reward. And that's why many people that have been through traumas have a difficult time jumping out of their comfort zone, a difficult time trying something new, a difficult time getting out there and doing something, even if they know it could be fun, even if they know it could be good for them, because they see the risks first. And a lot of the risk could be, what if I look like a fool? What if I this? What if I that? That's ego. That's your RAS basically trying to filter out anything new. So your RAS, your selective focus, is essentially what keeps you in your comfort zone. It's what keeps you away from listening to other points of view. It's what keeps you away from learning anything different than what you already believe. It's what gives us different opinions. RAS is the reason that two of us can look at the same situation or subject and develop two different opinions off of it, because each of us has a selective attention to different aspects of whatever it is that we're looking at that are important to us based on reward and threat of our past experience. And that is why two people can witness the same thing but have seen it two completely different ways and can talk about it in two completely different ways. So why do I bring all this up about what the RAS is and what it does? Well, like I said a second ago, it can be trained. You can retrain your RAS with a lot of effort and discipline, right? But the thing you have to remember first is that whatever thoughts you have to recognize where they come from. They come from the brain. They come from brain matter. They come from molecules. They come from neurons and electrons and things like that. And you have to remind yourself that that is just the brain trying to protect itself. That's your past traumas coming up. That's your learned experience through rewards coming up. And if you really want to make a change, you really want to get out of that rut and get out of those patterns of behavior, you're going to have to change the way you think about it, which is extraordinarily difficult. Extraordinarily difficult, not going to lie. But the first step to that, sorry, I had to get my tea in. But the first step for that is recognizing that those thoughts, where they come from, right? They're coming from a piece of your brain. Your brain, and you got to think of your brain as a tool, right? Stop thinking of your brain as you. Stop thinking of your thoughts as you. You're not those. You're what pays attention to those. You're what decides what to pay attention to, right? Well, your RAS may filter out information, but you are actually what chooses how to look at that information. So your RAS filters out the information. These thoughts start to come up based on traumas, rewards, etc., and then they're very convincing. They're convincing that that's you, and that is your body. That's your brain through its learned experience. But if you want to change that behavior, you have to recognize that that's just your brain, and you have to convince yourself of something different, right? So when you see that selective attention come up and you find yourself only seeing risks and only seeing the downsides of something, that's why it's important to take a piece of paper and write down some positives about it too. Force yourself to think about the other side of it. This is what helps you change your perspective on the things that you think. Guys, this is the base level of all self-help. It doesn't matter. All self-awareness, all self-help, whether you're looking at books or videos or anything like that, starts with reconditioning the RAS system to believe in yourself, right? All self-help starts with reconditioning the RAS system and changing the way you think about yourself, changing the way that you believe about yourself, changing the things you believe about yourself, and learning to become more open-minded about things. Because that is the first step to being able to retrain your RAS. So that's why a lot of these things, like, it doesn't even matter what it is, right? So it could be tea, right? So a lot of self-help things will point to a hobby, essentially, such as maybe herbal teas or something along those lines, and so and convince you and try to convince you that it's really good for you. Now, whether it's good for you or not doesn't really matter. It'll still help. If you're convinced it's good for you and you start to practice some sort of hobby, and you think that it's having a good effect on you and on your brain and on the way you think about life, then it will have a good effect on the way you think about life, the placebo effect, right? So all self-help starts with that, because that's how you retrain your RAS system, right? So I pick a hobby, maybe I get into stones or jewelry or frequency stuff or meditation or tea or anything that I feel like is going to make me healthier, going to make me feel better, going to make me think better. And then as long as I believe that, my RAS will start to believe it too. And therefore, whenever I'm drinking my tea or doing my meditation or listening to that music or whatever it is, my RAS will then begin to go, oh, okay, this is time to reward the brain. And then it'll start releasing more rewarding experiences, more rewarding things to pay attention to, because you believe that it's good for you. This is reprogramming the RAS system. This is also, though, I get it, you got to be careful, because this is also how cults form, right? Cults take advantage of your RAS system by showing you that you can reprogram it by getting you to let go of past habits and reform new ones and think positive things about them, and get you to change the way you believe about yourself and the way you believe about the world. So they change your RAS system, and then through that you start to see the reward of this new way, and then that's how cults manipulate you into things you didn't want to do or things you didn't want to get involved in. So that's something you do have to pay attention to. But all self-help, all the best self-help, starts with reprogramming the RAS. And that, to start that, you have to have some kind of spark. You have to have some kind of inspiration of something different that you're going to believe. Whether it's something you're going to believe different about yourself, like you decide to believe sitting still 10 minutes a day is going to help you, then it's going to help you. And then if you start practicing it, you truly believe it is helping you, then you're going to start to feel better and happier for hours or minutes to hours afterwards. And the more you do it, the better you're going to feel. And this reprograms the RAS system. Now the RAS system is like, okay, so when we sit still and do nothing for a little while, that means that after we get up, we're only going to be looking for the positive sides of things. We're only going to be looking for the rewards. And then it starts to reprogram your RAS to look at the rewards of everything around you. Same thing if you believe a good cup of hot tea is going to help you wake up in the morning, even though maybe it has no caffeine. Well, if you believe it and you drink it and you convince yourself that you feel refreshed by it every morning, and you continue to do that, then your RAS is going to rewire itself. It's going to reprogram itself to believe that once I have that flavor of that particular tea, that I'm gonna wake up. I'm going to wake up, right? If you believe that moving around and exercising in the morning, like doing some dynamic stretches or something like that, is going to help wake you up, and you truly believe it, and you convince yourself when you're doing it that it's going to wake you up, you're doing it to wake you up, and you convince yourself that it does wake you up at the end of it, and you continue to do that, it has a bigger and bigger effect on reprogramming the RAS part of your brain to basically allow you to have the information that this is going to reward me with feeling good, therefore I will feel good, therefore all the sensory that comes in is being filtered by my RAS is going to filter to the feel good reward side as it enters my brain, right? This is therapy and self-help 101 right here. Let me stop and get a drink of tea myself. All right. So I know some of you guys have just joined. Like I said, I'm interested to know your comments and what your thoughts are on this particular topic and what it has to do with focus. So imagine that you're stuck in a rut. You're stuck in, it seems like life is just kind of the same thing over and over and over again, and it's going downhill, and it's all kind of negative, and it's all this, that, and the other. Well, you need a shock. You need a shock to your RAS system to reprogram it. And the only way to do that is through experience, through reward and threat. So you can look at, if you have a habit that's not good for you, maybe you smoke, maybe you drink too much, maybe you drink too much caffeine or whatever. You have to get to that point where you can convince yourself that it is worse for you than what you think it's giving you, right? So you might think it's helping you relax. You might think it's helping you wake up, and that's the reward. So your RAS sees that as the reward, and it starts to give you that. You know what I mean? Every time you have that cup of coffee or have that smoke or whatever it is that you're doing, right? And then to change that behavior is very, very difficult. I'm not trying to make it sound easy. But the first step to changing that behavior is you've got to convince yourself that the risk is not as good as the reward, that it makes you feel worse in a way rather than feel better, right? And then once you get to that point that you can convince yourself that, well, this is actually making me feel a lot worse, then it becomes easier to begin to reprogram the reticular activation system to a new reward, right? Which is where a lot of people used to say, you know, when you're trying to quit doing something, replace it with something else. Like if you're trying to quit coffee, go to tea. If you're trying to, you know, whatever. It's all about slowly taking one step at a time to reprogram the RAS system, right? So what are your thoughts on that? Did you guys ever heard of that before, the reticular activation system? That it unconsciously filters out everything that you see, hear, taste, smell, and touch, right? It not just filters it all out, it filters to tell you what's important, right? So if I start to put my hand towards something and it's warm, and I'm in the middle of talking to somebody else, and I'm fully in this conversation, as soon as my hand feels the warm sensation, the RAS is going to go threat, and I'm going to instantly go to that and forget about what I was just saying, right? So that's what the RAS system does. It chooses what's important to pay attention to. And like I said, all of our RAS systems are conditioned by our past experiences, our past rewards, and our past consequences, right? So if someone has a lot of traumas in their past life, then their RAS is going to be ruled by threats, right? It's going to be ruled by everything it's seeing as a threat. And this is why, you know, positive parenting and reward parenting can be really, really good and really important. I know consequences have to happen. It's got to be disciplinary in nature and stuff like that. But where it can be really good is it can program a person's RAS to look for the reward before it looks at the risk. And that can have really positive outcomes on your life, right? So when we're talking about kids and raising children, that's why it's really, really important to always be trying to point out the positives with them, especially if they're looking at something in a negative way. Because if they're constantly going into the negative territory or seeing things as threats or things along those lines and becoming terrified, that's going to become a problem later in life, because the RAS is being programmed to focus on the threat more than it is to focus on rewards. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Back when we were, tribal, and you had to survive the wolves and things like that, right? Our brain needed this. Our brain needed to make the threat more important than the reward. And so that's really how most of us were programmed. But in today's society, putting the threat in front of the reward actually holds you back. So if you were like in, a survivalistic mode, out in the woods or whatever, you would prefer your RAS to bring the threat in first. But in today's society, you don't get anywhere without taking some amount of risk and putting yourself out there, whether you're talking about in relationships or you're talking about in jobs and careers or this, that, and the other. And so it becomes really important to try to get that part of the brain to focus on the reward side more than the threat side, because then that allows a person to see the risk but also see the reward at the other side of the risk and decide whether that's worthwhile or not, right? Versus the person whose RAS system really, really focuses on the threat first, who will constantly look for their comfort zone. That person will constantly look for a place to feel comfortable and safe. In fact, the matter is no matter where they're at, they're never going to feel comfortable and safe, because the RAS is always going to be look for something in that environment that's threatening, something in that environment that's going to be hurtful, right? Even if it's not there. And this is where you see it's really tough to deal with kids like this, but kids and adults that have traumas, this is where you see that they'll push away nice people, right? They'll be mean to you when you try to help them and be nice to them. It's because they're at a point, they've been through some trauma, they're at a point where they see everything as a threat. And so it's important when you run into somebody like that not to take it too personally, but instead to realize that this person has been through some stuff and needs help reprogramming the way that they look at the world, the way that they look at themselves, right? So if you're always thinking thoughts about what you're not good at or bad thoughts about yourself. I got a student right now, oh my goodness, I've tried, I work with him a lot, but he has this habit of every time I try to compliment, he'll say the opposite, right? He'll say the negative of what I just said. And the thing is I know, I think sometimes he does this as a joke, but I know what's happening there is he is programming the RAS center of his brain to filter out all good information and replace it with bad information. So he'll start to see anyone who's being nice to him as a threat. He'll start to see anyone who is being helpful to him as a threat. And for that reason, he will always see himself as not able. He will always see himself as not good. He will always see himself as not as good as others. And therefore, why try, right? Why should I try if I'm not as good as others, right? Because he has a hard time seeing the reward. All he can see is the negative. That's your RAS system. That's what it does. It is selective attention. So when you catch yourself realizing that you have little control over what exactly you're paying attention to, what sense you're paying attention to at any given time, and you have to realize that that's something that you've become a slave to your RAS. You've become a slave to your brain by convincing yourself, by convincing your ego to believe a certain thing. Whether you've convinced your ego that you're not good enough or you've convinced your ego of something else, right? So this is why it's really, really important, and I find it's really important to try to keep an open mind, right? To try not to lock myself into any kind of beliefs about myself. To try not to lock myself into any kind of beliefs about other people. Because the second I do, my RAS is going to start only feeding me information that fuels that belief. Now, this can be worked in another way as well, whereas if I'm having a hard time, I can begin to practice a different kind of belief, as in practice that ginger and turmeric tea will help me wake up, right? And if I practice that belief, doesn't matter if it's true or not. It doesn't. If I practice that belief, then my RAS is going to start looking for reasons why that might be true, and therefore my body is going to respond in kind, and it will become true. That is how the placebo effect works, is through the reticular activation system. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up. So if you're dealing with a child who's having a tough time with their mental space, or maybe another adult's having a tough time with their mental space, or who has a tough time choosing what to pay attention to, then it might be a good time to start studying the reticular activation system and start to look into ways that it can be retrained. Because once we become a slave to the reticular activation, and all it takes to become a slave to the RAS system is believing something, right? You believe something about yourself, your RAS system will only give you information that confirms that belief. You decide to believe the opposite thing about yourself, your RAS system will only give you information or only bring in information that confirms that belief. So it really all starts with confidence, right? It starts with the ability to begin to believe that something helps you, or begin to believe that you can do something, or begin to believe that you can be good at something. It all starts with confidence. Once you begin to believe that, then your RAS begins to reprogram itself to give you more information to back up that you're good at it, to back up that you're awesome at it, to back up that you're smart, right? But if you start seeing, like, take a mistake and start seeing it as a problem, or you start to believe something and someone shows you how what you believe is wrong, and you have that tendency to become defensive and fight against it, that's your RAS system trying to block out the signals that that person is giving to you, because you've already chosen what to believe in. This is why it can be really, really dangerous to make snap judgments about people, to make snap judgments about situations, because you already decide what to believe in without all the information. Then when more information comes in, you're more likely to just ignore it. You're more likely to become defensive about it and claim that it's wrong no matter what, because your RAS system is only going to look to back up the things you believe in order to keep you comfortable and in your comfort zone, right? So you've got to be willing to reprogram that. You've got to be willing to reprogram the way you think about yourself. This is the beginning of all self-help. This is the beginning of all self-healing. So whether you're helping someone else, or you're helping a kid, or you're trying to maybe heal from some past traumas yourself, or you're just trying to get better focus. So that's step one, doing that. Step two, I'll give you a step two before I end this video. Take things slowly. When you find your brain going all over the place and you find yourself getting stuck on the threats, or stuck on this, or stuck on that, and you need to move on to something else, slow down. I mean, slow down everything. Slow down your movement. Start walking at a quarter of the speed you were walking before, and start trying to pay attention to what every movement feels like, what moving your hand feels like, what the air on your body feels like, what your emotion feels like, and just anything but what's going on in your brain. Pay attention to anything external except what's going on in your brain, and take very slow, small steps, or try to get, a child to do it with you, for example. By taking those slow, small steps and thinking, really focusing on the external thing that I'm doing, and only the thing that I'm doing, where I'm going, what it feels like, pouring that water, whatever it is, that can help our brain reset and get off of those traps that the RAS puts us in, of trying to fill us up with threatening signals or even reward signals. It also does this with reward signals, which is known as manic behavior, right? So this is pretty common in bipolar, where if you get stuck on the scary signals, the traumatic signals, the threatening signals, then that's where you end up with anxiety and depression, and you walk around and have a difficult time with that, because then you start to believe you have anxiety and depression, and whether you have it or not, by believing it, your RAS starts to filter all information to prove you have anxiety and to prove you have depression. On the opposite side of that, if your RAS is all focused on reward, right, then you're always going to be dopamine chasing. So you're always going to be looking for the reward, constantly looking for the reward, and you're only going to care about or look at sensory information that brings that reward, and it puts you in a better and better and better mood until you're like unreasonably excited and happy. And that's what kind of creates a manic episode in bipolar, for example, is that the RAS begins to filter everything into a rewarding way. Everything's going our way, everything feels great, so we get really excited and we start being really energetic and we really start opening up, and then something bad happens, and the threat side and the RAS starts to look at the threatening side of something that happened, or what could go bad about something we said, or what could go bad about something we did while we were happy, while we were manic, and that brings the depressive side of bipolar. So essentially the RAS is a big key factor in what causes or in what keeps people stuck in anxiety, depression, bipolar, and things like that. And it is a very, very difficult thing to try to retrain, and it can never be fully retrained. You know what I mean? Once the brain gets to a certain habit, it can never be fully retrained. But I don't know, maybe it can, right? Maybe if you believe it can, maybe it can. Maybe if you believe in it and you work hard enough at believing that the brain chemistry can be changed through convincing yourself of different beliefs so that your RAS system starts to feel differently, then hey, maybe it can. But the thing you got to remember is, like, let's take bipolar, for example. Bipolar always goes from one side to the other, right? It swings. It doesn't stay on one side. It swings from one side to the other. That's still a lack of balance. So anxiety, depression tends to be on one side, manic tends to be on the other, but it's a lack of balance, a lack of ability to stay stable and in the middle. So a healthy RAS system will see both. Will stay in the middle and see reward and threat, right? And it can see both sides and will swing both directions, but kind of stay in the center. But when you get too far off one direction, that's when we can start having problems. That's when problems can begin to develop for us, and we can have a difficult time relating to the reality of our life. So there's 2 steps. I've just given you 2 steps. The first one, reprogramming your beliefs even through a hobby, right? Second one, physically slowing down and paying attention to the external thing that you're doing to try to get your brain to stop thinking about it. Well, here, the brain's still going to think, but the whole point of that is to take your focus away from your thoughts and put it on your action, right? If you can take your focus away from your thought and put it onto your action, it can kind of reset you from a bad rut, right? From a bad process. But it's difficult. Well, one of the things that can help with that, exercise, right? Exercise can help with that, because the more you exercise, the more difficult the physical motion gets. The more difficult the physical motion gets, the more focus you put on the physical exertion instead of the thoughts going on in your head. And that's another way that you can do this. Or you can slow down and just put the focus on what you're doing. Anyway, I've been on here long enough. I appreciate you guys all listening to me talk about RAS in the brain and swings back and forth and things like that. If you found this information helpful, I'd love to hear from you, right? Leave us a comment, send me a message, whatever. And this has been another episode of Teammate Talks. Until we see you guys again, be the best teammate you can be, and be the best at being you.